Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this second Q&A with our Chief Minister, Alfred Cannan. My name's Marian Kenny. I work in the Cabinet Office in the Council of Ministers office, and my job here is simply to get this session going and keep it moving. I hope you're all enjoying your Isle of Man Government Conference experience so far. So as you'll know, the three big themes this year have been education and skills, which was delivered through presentations, panels and keynote speeches on the main stage last night. This morning, the finance and budgets and economy chunk has been delivered, and this afternoon, housing and communities and brownfield. But as well as that, we've got these standalone question and answer sessions, which are not tied to any of those three themes. This is as billed, no frills, no spin, no pre-prepared answers. We don't know what you're going to ask, and the Chief Minister will do his very best to answer them. We've got half an hour, so I'm going to try and rattle through quite a few. The way to ask your questions is either ask it in person, put your hand up and we'll bring a microphone to you. You can stand up and ask your question, or you can download the QR code on the screen behind me. And you can ask your question through your device and it will magically turn up on my tablet and I'll ask it on your behalf. When you do that, choose Cinema Room as the location. And if you can't get to it that way, go to slido.com and access online. So Chief Minister was here doing his first Q&A last night and he dealt with a whole scutch of different issues. I think you fielded questions on climate change, population growth, housing associations, government spending, immigration, to name a few. So we're hoping for a whole lot more today. I'm sure you'll get those. So Chief Minister, let's just put it to you that question for me just to start really is that this conference, it's the second one. You said last year it's all about having a conversation with the public and engagement. So how do you think that is actually working out, and what did you gain from last year?
Well, last year was our initial conference. I think the idea has been in the back of my mind, and it was picked up when we were discussing my leadership bid. I think the sort of party political conferences that we see in the UK are vehicles. Okay, that they're conducted, of course, along party lines, but they are vehicles to explain policy, to discuss with party members, constituent members, where the government, the day is going and where the opposition are going and what policies are right, and also for people to explain their position and of course receive some form of scrutiny or explanation in the form of questions. So, this is the second year. I'm very encouraged actually by the quality of the presentations that we've seen, by the quality of the questions that we're receiving, and look, open to feedback. I'm hoping that the conference can continue to develop. It's a way of reaching out across the community. It's a valuable platform, I think, for the government to talk not just about current policy, but actually more importantly about future policy direction. So I hope there is some value in the conference, and of course we have sought to improve it this year by bringing yesterday the evening section in. Of course, I appreciate not everybody can get to these conferences, nor can you possibly explore every single facet of government policy. But I hope it's value, and we'll reassess at the end of this conference and hopefully get some feedback from people as to how it should be conducted next year.
Well, the big deal last year was the Island Plan and the economic strategy. So the Island Plan's a 5-year plan for action, and the government's just gone into its third year. So give us a very quick update on progress.
Yeah, so it's been a very challenging 2 years for government. I think everybody's aware of the international and localized circumstances which have meant it's been challenging. That's everything from exiting COVID into dealing with the Russia invasion of Ukraine, the impact that's had on gas prices, the spike in inflation, which has caused a lot of pressure on people's income, and the sort of cost of living crisis. We've had to deal with that. We've reacted to that. We've brought in a refugee program to make sure we were contributing to efforts to support Ukraine. We've obviously brought in the key core fundamentals of the Island Plan, the strategic approaches, and now really it's about delivery for us. I think it's going into this third year. I really want to see some real progress. I was delighted this morning to see the plans being outlined by the Enterprise Minister for brownfield site development. 3 core brownfield sites are getting backing. There's others in the pipeline, which I'm hoping to bring to fruition. It's great this afternoon to be talking about the formation of a housing association, which I think will bring a much greater strategic direction to tackling the housing problems, particularly when it comes to first-time buyers and particularly when it comes to social housing. And of course, we're going to continue to push forward in a number of other areas, including we've got a childcare strategy that needs to be implemented, which I hope will benefit particularly working parents, but also very, very young children in terms of the care and attention that they are getting. And it's going to be a critical time, of course, for the Treasury Minister at the next budget as well. We're well aware of some of the pressures from the deficit that we're running, and also, of course, that will have been affected by inflation. But I'm positive that we are entering a period that will see some positive progress for the island, and I think it's absolutely critical for this government that evidence of delivery starts to happen. And of course, I think some of that has already happened at this conference, and I look forward to more of that happening over the next few months.
Thank you. So that gets us off with a bigger picture. Let's have a question from the floor. Gentleman in the second row, if you could just wait while the microphone comes to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name's George Hargreaves. I'm the director of the Isle of Man International Film Festival. So I'm going to ask you about the film industry. What are the government prepared to do to reignite what was a wonderful, wonderful film industry here? And we've seen in the UK, it was just on the BBC yesterday, how the reintroduction of tax breaks has allowed studios to start to be rebuilt in the UK. The strike in America has meant that even Barbie was done in the UK. We can do movies here. What are the government prepared to do? Can we have our tax breaks back?
Well, thanks very much, George. I'm delighted that you're, helping film industry, media industry on the island. Listen, I mean, I think we've taken a very clear strategic direction in terms of our economic plans. I was with actually the chief executive officer from Lloyds Bank, the main group, who came to the island the other day, and one of the things he said to me and was complimentary about was the fact that we do have an economic strategy. Whether you agree with it or not, we have an economic strategy, and he was quite critical of the fact that areas around us perhaps are lacking in that vision. Part of that is 5,000 new jobs, and of course within that we need to make sure that we are, of course, building and developing our existing businesses, but developing new areas as well. And we have had, strong growth, or we're trying to facilitate strong growth in new areas. For example, in digital, and the digital agency is looking very closely at how digital is progressing and what new areas, and fintech, for example, and we're running a very innovative fintech competition. I think going directly to film, I think we've had that experience from an Isle of Man perspective. I think there was a lot of questions about cost-benefit analysis. I know it's a very good promotional activity. My view in terms of our positioning is that we would look at projects on an individual basis as they arrive, but we do not have a specific drive for the film industry as we were before, because I think we really do need to ensure that we are getting maximum value from that. The taxpayer is getting maximum value from the expenditure. And I think it's probably fair to say, that wasn't always clearly demonstrated. And you will know as well as I do that, that there's a lot of industry activity that yes, creates some economic activity around it, but doesn't necessarily demonstrate a return for the end product per se. So it is it's not always a transparent business when it comes to financial returns. And I think what we're doing in terms of the core areas that we're driving are the right areas. For this government, it is about developing the industries, financial services, insurance, digital, e-gaming, and of course around that we've got our localized industry, domestic economy, if you like, the visit agency, the tourism. But as I say, film is something, of course, we will talk to you about, but it is on an individual basis. Absolutely. We've got a fantastic team at the Department for Enterprise. They will talk to you absolutely about any project that is worthwhile to bring economic returns broadly to the island. And of course, we would look at the case on an individual basis.
I'll take another one from the floor. The gentleman That one, two in from the aisle. That's the one.
Chief Minister, there's lots of people leaving California because of the high taxes. What's the Isle of Man doing to attract a global audience? And why do we have so much cut and paste legislation, meaning that an American coming to the Isle of Man can't drive until they pass their test here, whereas a Canadian can, or a Romanian can come and swap his driving license for a Manx license, but an American can't. So a lot of those people that want to relocate here are just not bothering. There's too many barriers.
So, I mean, I think, you know, immigration is a subject that's very much at the forefront of discussion at the moment. We've set an ambitious island plan out. We want to attract, you know, 5,000 new jobs, and we want to attract the young demographic to come and fill those jobs. And, you know, we haven't set any definition as to where people come from. So actually, international individuals who want to come to the island, you know, the door is open, but of course they've got to come through the immigration process, and we're very, very closely connected to the United Kingdom in terms of that access point and the rules governing such access. Of course, you talk about sort of intricacies around driving, for example. I'm not fully conversant with every technicality, but you know, my view is that we would be having to sort of comply with what the UK regulations were in these areas, because simply if you've got a Manx license, you'll be entitled to drive on UK roads, and vis-a-vis there could be complications if you were then to simply use us use the island as effectively as a backdoor to then access into the United Kingdom, and that's fundamentally where we are having our discussions about immigration and trying to find pathways, sensible pathways for skilled labour to come to the island. And actually, I think the critical barrier is about that entry point and the time it takes and the assessment process that people are undergoing in terms of being able to come to the island. But a lot of that involves extensive negotiation with the UK, and we are of course trying to find our own pathways through, but again we'll have to do that with the United Kingdom.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to go to one that's come in on Slido now. Is government considering leveraging its ownership of the steam packet to achieve its economic ambitions? Is that about dividends from the steam packet?
Well, I think the Treasury Minister did, the last budget, declare he was going to take a small dividend from the steam packet. Look, when we purchased the steam packet in 2018 for strategic security purposes, I think many of us felt we were unclear as to what benefits private ownership was bringing to the steam packet. It was clearly being leveraged purely for corporate profits. A lot of debt was being leveraged against the steam packet. You know, and frankly, that decision to purchase the steam packet for £120 million, I think, was immediately justified sort of no more than 24 months later when COVID hit the island. I dread to think what negotiations would have had to have taken place with a private company, our absolute lifeline, had we not owned those vessels. I think, you know, when we purchased it, we took the view it should run at arm's length. It shouldn't be a nationalised business. It is effectively a private company that the government, that the shareholders, the island owns, and you know, we want it to keep running successfully. I think there's plenty of evidence where government has interfered directly into assets, national assets, potentially ships, and I look at Scotland as a classic example, you know, where once you get into that sort of national approach of trying to utilise the company incorrectly, if you like, for what short-term benefits, we then find ourselves in trouble through extensive debt problems, or the company becomes inefficient and ineffective. I think the steam packet is something that should evolve. I think we should be very proud of the position the steam packet's in. I know there's a few teething troubles with the new ship, but this morning we were hearing from the panel on the financial panel and from outside experts who were giving very positive indicators of what it means when you step on that ship, when you're visiting the island and come across. Because it is indicating the island is serious about developing its economy, is serious about the quality of life on the island. And I think, though, one needs to be mindful, of course, now that the government is the shareholder, it still remains effectively a monopoly organisation. I think we do need to consider, to factor and be clear that it is still running ultimately for the benefit of the island. So there are things that I think when we come to renegotiate the user agreement, which is effectively our leverage with the company, as to whether there may be additional requirements placed on the company to ensure that we are its operation is in line with our ambitions to increase our visitor base and grow our economy.
Thank you for that. I'll go back to the floor to try and find someone that I know hasn't asked a question before. The lady with the glasses here. Just wait for the microphone.
Just talk into it. Can you hear me?
Just put it below your mouth. That's it. Yep.
Okay. Good afternoon, Minister. You know what I'm going to ask about. I went to the presentation on big infrastructure projects in small jurisdictions, and I heartily agree. We did need the new Manannan. We did need the Manxman. Sorry, we did need the promenade looking at, and we definitely perhaps need the landing stage. But what now about the little infrastructure projects? And I know you know that for 5 years I've tried to get some input for the bus station in Douglas, the bus station in Ramsey. Port Erin is taken over by a cafe. The Peel one was knocked down. But more importantly, the bus timetables. Surplus of buses down south and north in the evenings when people would like to go and have a meal in Ramsey or go to a show in Ramsey or whatever. We can get there very comfortably, but coming home is a problem.
So it's about sorting out the small stuff as well. Oh, it's
Yeah,
not
I
that
mean,
small,
I think so. I won't drill down necessarily into the specifics of the bus timetable, but the general point that I think you're making, and I think has been clearly a subject of concern, is, okay, you're pushing forward with these big ambitions to grow the island, bring in the 5,000 new workers, make sure that develop the brownfield sites. And this morning we talked about 3 new brownfield sites being developed, and the taxpayer is going to support those. But hopefully we will recognise the benefits of doing that, both in terms of the economic value that'll bring to the construction industry, but also to local retailers in those particular town centres. But I think the point I want to make is that I'm very conscious, Council of Ministers is very conscious of the fact, we've still got to deliver good local services, because it's pointless hitting all the high-level strategic objectives and not really delivering for the local population on the ground. And even new people coming to the island are going to find it difficult if we haven't got the right bus service. So this is constantly on our mind. And what it comes down to effectively is the right prioritisation, because money is very, very tight at the moment. There's absolutely a need to prioritise. And potentially in some areas, there's a need to do things differently. We can drive that, I think, by focusing on delivering the overall right policy strategic directives, but also I think there is a case for some of these areas need to engage more with the local communities to actually understand where there are shortfalls. Now, if I take the bus service, actually, the buses are seemingly running reasonably well, right? A lot of them are running to time, and generally, from a period a couple of years ago, there was a lot of flux within the organisation itself. There is actually quite a lot of stability at the moment. Your question, and the question that, for me as a local MHK is, are the regions being properly served, particularly at night time? and should we be taking the losses of serving them, because we know that a lot of those services run at a loss, but actually is the benefit still being delivered to the town and town centres by getting people into be able to access either the facilities they want to, or the pubs or the restaurants and things they want to go to. So I think my message actually for this conference is to say I fully recognise there is still a lot for us to do when it comes to service delivery. Buses is certainly one area, but of course everybody knows we've got some big challenges in health, and of course we need to continue to drive forward education, both I think impacted quite a lot by the COVID pandemic, and it is absolutely part of our priorities to make sure day-to-day delivery is being focused on and also invested in. But we have got priority challenges, and just whilst we talk about investment slightly, I think one of our critical needs at the moment is to look at, when you come to some of the infrastructure that we're talking about, how that financing is being done, and what other alternatives can be found, rather than just drawing down on a narrowing treasury tax take to finance development for the greater benefit of society. Housing is one of those areas that I think we're a housing association. There's a lot of talk about that, but effectively part of the premise in delivering first-time buyer accommodation and delivering social housing is actually it takes it away from the central treasury budget, and you start to run it on a more business scenario where you leverage off the asset base, and hopefully stop then running deficits, which the taxpayer is paying for, but still delivering the right outcomes for the community.
Okay, thank you. We have to move on. So I've got one here which speaks to population issues. We're trying to attract new, younger residents to support our ageing population. What will be different when that generation retires? Or will we have then to attract more young people to support them as they age?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always this sort of long-term potential for the situation to change and develop. I mean, at some point, though, people have to make decisions, and we can see the change in demographics, and you look potentially at a worsening situation where effectively 40% of the population was supporting 60% of the population if changes were not made in the next 15, 20 years. And of course, the potential for that means that the 40%, the youngsters who are working and supporting the older generation, if you like, are increasingly under pressure as costs continue to rise, and health is a classic example of that. We're already struggling with the healthcare budget as it is. If we change that basis of the demographic, you can imagine the cost implications for the active youngsters. And of course, I think we have a responsibility to try and change that, and to make sure the island is still an attractive place to work, and of course that our economy continues to grow. I think as things push forward and develop, and that's the here and now, obviously in 20, 30 years time, that challenge may be reshaping and maybe changing. And of course, that will be the perennial job of governments and politicians to try and shape the strategic direction to meet the need. But our view is, we can clearly see the potential issues. We need to build, I think this is a great challenge for all of us at the moment. We are trying to build an island that is going to be fit for our youngsters in 15 and 20 years time. And we can see that whether it's in education, whether it's in health, but particularly when it comes to that sort of core infrastructure challenges around energy and what that is going to look like as well. So, there's a lot to think about, and I'm not saying it's absolutely a perfect strategic approach, because things change and develop, but it's the right approach for the moment.
I'll take another one from the floor. The gentleman third row from the front. Just wait one moment.
Chief Minister, hi. As you're aware, we Ren Sustainable have constructed some of what we believe are some of the most sustainable affordable houses in the British Isles in Victoria Road. I mean, you yourself actually visited the properties. Sadly, the whole concept of modular modern modular construction has not really been touched on by anyone in the island, really. That's including the Manx Development Corporation, who, when I talked to them about it, said they weren't planning to use modular construction. In fact, they were going to use the old standard of the Isle of Man, which is masonry construction, which, you know, I don't understand why this is happening. Now, further than that, I actually wrote you on the 21st of July, making the point, mentioning what I've just covered, but also the fact that in the 1970s and early 80s, I was involved in a project which created a cooperative building and housing association company, alongside many professionals, including Professor Laurie Taylor, the quite well-known sociologist. It was mainly to look at how one improved the relationships between labour and management in the construction industry, which were pretty dire at the time. And in that sense, it was successful. What we did learn from that was the mistakes not to make in creating such a social enterprise scheme. Now, my concern with, the fact that you're talking to the Channel Islands and looking at the housing associations in the Channel Islands, which were specifically set up for the local needs, that we really need in the Isle of Man to develop a social enterprise scheme for this area with very, very specific input. Now, I'm still in touch with one of the most prominent advisors to the whole cooperative and social enterprise movement in the UK, and I have approached them, and they said they would be quite willing to do open discussion with the Isle of Man. My personal feeling is that a cooperative housing association in the Isle of Man, which, if as you're proposing to use I believe about 1,200 houses in the island that government currently own as the core of, would give an opportunity to optimise the potential of a housing association, in that the existing tenants could have an option to either remain tenants of the cooperative housing association, or effectively to purchase an interest or a total interest in the property they live in. Now, the advantage of this would be with a cooperative housing association that effectively it would be linked totally to the housing association. So there would be a pre-established price set on a property. If you wish to sell it, you'd have to sell it back to the housing association. And
could I ask you to distill that really interesting background? Can you distill it into a question?
I think, I would say, I wrote you on the 21st back because I was so concerned about this. And I would say, I'm hoping that potentially, I can link you with this group in England that you could talk to, because I think it's so critically important that if we are going to set up a housing association in the island, it doesn't just become another local authority with all the problems that they have in terms of.
Yeah, so Luke, thanks very much. We're always willing to talk to people. The way this is going to happen, I mean, after this presentation, we've got the consultants who actually did that initial report for us, but there's an open chance to discuss it, and then we're going to go out to a public consultation about how best this is shaped. I think the critical political point is that, 2 years ago, there was a lot of feedback from the community that housing was not in a good place, that first-time buyers, that youngsters were struggling to get on the housing ladder, that the overall strategic approach was lacking. I think it's taken us 2 years. It's probably taken us 2 years too long to get to this point, but there is something needs to change in terms of the focus and the way things are addressed. We've now looked at the evidence, looked at the way that the good housing associations, and they're not-for-profit organisations, they're driving a whole range of approaches, including first-time buyers, the ability to buy and sell. Yes, sell back to the association so the property becomes available for the next people who need it. They can tackle a more holistic approach in terms of that sort of cradle-to-grave offering for families perhaps who urgently need housing, with children at a very, very young age, to retirement living as well. There's a real need to bring some more focus on the island. One of our issues is that we've got so many local authorities, all with their own housing stock. I don't think it leads greatly to efficiency or to consistency in terms of approach. And not only that, not only have we got to invest, we've also got to invest properly and make sure that we're building housing that is, inverted commas, sustainable, is more suited to our current ambitions to ensure that people are living in warmer houses, that are more properly designed for the renewable energy systems that will also accompany those houses. So there's a huge amount of work to do, but there will be some consultation. Listen, we're delighted to reach out to people who've got expertise in this area.
I'm just saying this is actually the end of our slot, and I'm conscious that some people want to go to the housing.
10-minute extension for you, Keith.
And I was literally going to invite the Chief Minister if he would like to extend it. If people want to go to the housing, it's now.
If you wish to go to the housing, please do, but I'm happy to stay here for another 10 minutes. Or
I'm
so.
going to go to the floor to the lady in the green cardigan. Just wait a moment.
We shall let the departees leave.
It was a boring question anyway.
Spice it up.
Thanks, Chief Minister. So my question, as you might have guessed, revolves around immigration and employment, and particularly on employers. And if you'll bear with me, it's got two elements, but I think they're both important. First one is a question about the government's policy on where the costs of immigration should fall. So by that I mean if a person moves to the UK, for example, the employer pays a significant cost in terms of fees. The migrant themselves pays a cost in terms of the immigration health charge. That's about to rise to £1,000 per person per year for the duration of their visa. And then the government derives revenue because it gets the entry clearance fees. In the Isle of Man, all of those costs fall on the taxpayer. The employer pays no costs. There's no immigration health charge, so that the new migrant to the island doesn't pay any costs in terms of their healthcare, and we don't receive the entry clearance fees. They all go to the UK. So at present, as I understand it, we're issuing about 100 visas a week. Since Q1 2021, we've issued about 4,000 visas, all coming to the Isle of Man. On that trajectory, we're probably running a little bit hot. We're likely to issue around 19,000 visas by 2037, and that's excluding anyone who's coming just straight from the UK or who's a British citizen, doesn't need a visa. So everybody who's already here feels the squeeze in terms of public sector services, feels the squeeze in terms of accommodation, and the employer derives benefit from this labour source, but they're not contributing to the cost. In fact, probably it's being subsidised. They get the NI holiday, they get grants. So that's the first part. Is that our policy? We're happy for the general taxpayer to cover the costs of that. And the second one is probably more important, but I've just had a very harrowing morning dealing with a group of migrants through a translator who have been brought to the island under some very, very dubious employment practices. They came in to do a job. They're doing something different. They're having deductions from their wages. They are living in bunk beds in shared accommodation. They're being moved from accommodation. And we have opted on the island, within the Common Travel Area framework, for the very, very light touch regulation on employers. There's very little we can do. The burden falls on the migrant. And these people are being threatened that if they speak out, if they contact anybody, then they won't be able to stay. They'll be shipped back and it'll have a negative impact on them. So what are we doing for ensuring that vulnerable people are not exploited? Because we don't have the modern slavery legislation. We don't really have anything that obliges employers to do anything outside general employment law. And there are some very dubious practices going on. And also that employers pay a fair share when they derive benefit from immigration.
Right. So I'm actually really disappointed to hear that. I mean, that is not something that I want to endorse in any way, and I would like to know more about that. I mean, I think interestingly enough, I'm aware, of course, that we have international individuals who come to the island and under perfectly legitimate programs and under perfectly legitimate visas. I think, for example, I'll take the Filipino community. I hope you're not talking about Filipinos because you are. Well, in that case, I'm even more concerned because, I mean, we had the embassy over 6 months ago, and actually one of their reasons for coming over was to make sure, as they do, because a lot of Filipinos fill a number of vacancies across the United Kingdom, particularly in the healthcare sector. As we know, I think we've got about 900 in our own national health service at the moment, doing hugely valuable work and covering vacancies for which we just can't find that local staffing. So my commitment is one, I would like to know more about that, and if there is a problem, then I think we need to look at it, and I'd like to know what we're doing about it, because that's clearly a concern, right, to hear that today. The second issue, and I think there is a bigger, broader discussion for us around immigration, the impact of it and the costs of it as well. I mean, I think if we are pursuing this, again, quite ambitious economic strategy, and we can see a lot of upsides in terms of what's going to be the outcomes, and I hope we're going to have more vibrant town centres. We're going to have a younger demographic. We will encourage businesses to the island, and we will all have longer term benefits, including much greater ability to ensure that our current aging population is properly looked after as they progress, and of course have additional funding to invest into our public services. Nevertheless, we all know there's potential complications around that. One of those complications is making sure actually that we do end up with the right result from what we're actually hoping to do, because if we get to the end of the program and find actually the balance of demographics hasn't really changed, because we don't have any real barriers to how people come to the Isle of Man at the moment, other than just that sort of visa process, if you like, because if you're living in the UK, you can just come across, and I think there's some of the there is some protection in place, but of course there is also a risk that the island's taxpayers pick up the cost from some of those entry points. I think we have got that on the sort of radar as a proper policy discussion point at the moment. I think it's difficult to always track the numbers on a day-by-day basis, if you like. It does often take a census for us to really get a proper handle on what the makeup of the island actually looks like. Again, my commitment to you on this is that immigration policy is something that we're actively looking at, because we are conscious the fact that actually as we grow the economy, hopefully successfully, we could also be creating a slight unfairness in terms of our current taxpayers and what they're actually, their return on their hard work and what they've invested into the island.
Okay, I've got one more here. You said another 10 minutes and this has to be the last one. So is there an opportunity to address the demographic challenge by looking at the productivity and contribution of active older residents?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a very, this is something I hope for all of us, because I mean it's not just on the Isle of Man, but clearly we do have challenges around the makeup and availability of the workforce, and certainly my message has been to try to encourage employers to look at more flexible ways of attracting staff in, to look actually at the older workforce, but also part of that is making sure that people do have those skills availability. We've just created a new skills board to try and ensure actually that our primary focus in terms of skills development is there. A lot of that is focused around, of course, the need for youngsters to train into respective areas, but also part of that emphasis should also be on the older workforce as well, and making sure that they too have opportunities to retrain and to come into the workforce. So absolutely, this shouldn't just necessarily be a one solution. We should be looking across all the options to ensure that we are fulfilling the need. And listen, older workers bring a huge amount both of experience and maturity into jobs. I'm a big fan of it, but often some of them do need some more flexibility in the way that they are undertaking their duties. So yes, it certainly needs to be a core part of our thinking, and indeed is part of our thinking, because we're trying to make sure that our college courses, our training courses are available to everybody across society.
Okay, so we've had an extended Q&A there with Chief Minister. I think he has to be somewhere else, and there's lots of other interesting and stimulating sessions throughout the afternoon.